I am Christina. I am the person behind LoveToLingo. And yeah, the idea of LoveToLingo is really to empower language learners and language teachers to sort of maximize their learning potential so that language learners reach their full potential as learners and teachers sort of help guide that idea, that potential.
Yeah. I love that we see your face, by the way, because I know, like, I love your logo, and it's so cute. It's so pretty, actually. Like it's the
Very nice.
heart,
My
and yeah.
sister-in-law designed it. It's great.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's like very my style, actually.
Right.
However, I'm also like, wait, who is this? And so when we
Right.
first connected, I can't remember exactly what it was about. I just obviously something language related. But what I love is that what I see you doing, and you're showing up every single day, is like you do have a lot of different personal experiences that are related to how you decided to go into creating your company and your brand. But I also feel like there's a big part of this that is like given your given your professional experiences, given like it's 20 years, right, that you've spent inside of the
Yeah,
industry. So
right.
do you
Oof.
want to just walk us through how that all came about and yeah, obviously manifested?
Sure. Yeah, so I ended up actually studying French at university in the United States. I hated university. I had a really hard time. It was a hard time, like personally for me. And I wanted to get out as soon as possible. So I went to my
Mm,
advisor and I said, how can I get a degree as soon as possible? So you have the most credits in French, essentially. I
mm,
said, well, guess what we're going to study? We're going to study French. So I
mm,
studied French at university. That was my major, and I minored in international relations. And then I moved to France right
mm,
after university. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I moved to France and worked on a ski resort and things,
mm,
and kind of got to experience the French life, and decided I wanted to stay in Europe, basically.
mm,
And one way to do that, again, this is about 20 years ago, 25
mm,
years ago,
mm,
was to become an English teacher. There was a huge kind of demand for that.
yeah.
And so I decided to go to Spain actually to do this qualification, a TEFL certification,
Mm,
because they were more expensive in France, and they didn't like that wasn't sort of the market wasn't as sort of developed in France, and it still isn't. It's much more
mm,
developed in Spain. And so I came here and came to Spain and thought, why am I living in France? This is so much better. It aligned a little bit more with
yeah.
my personality, and the things that I was interested in. Again, I was like 21, 22, and Spain is kind of known for the parties and stuff, so that was really fun for
Yeah.
me at that time. And so I came here and did
Yeah.
my TEFL certification here. I actually moved back to France because I had a job, or I had a contract at the time, and lived there for a bit and then
Mm,
moved back here. So then I've been here
mm,
and working in the English teaching industry for this time. And yeah, and did the degrees, more advanced degrees and stuff in English teaching, and just really got into it. It wasn't something that I planned to do. I think a lot of us sort of fell
yeah.
into language teaching as
Yeah.
sort of a backup plan. My
Yeah.
plan was to get this certificate and then travel the world. Go
Mm.
to Thailand and then go to Costa Rica and do all of this. And I just got stuck in the first place that I ended up. So
But
yeah,
stuck in a good way, right? Because I feel like, you've made
yeah,
your life there. And it's something that I think a lot of people take for granted, especially now we see so many people who are trying, like we're both, from the US, right? So basically, a lot of people trying to leave the US and trying to say, like, all right, well, I'll just, pack up my whole family and next month I'll go live in Spain. And it's like,
right.
wait, like, actually, it doesn't happen so automatically. Like you traveling for a 2-week vacation is very different than you actually deciding to move there long term. Can
Right.
you kind of talk us through how that process was like integrating into a new country? Because I know, you just said that you loved it.
Hmm.
I also completely see why. I come, like my own
Right.
personal experiences match.
Right.
But I do think there must have been challenges, right, that you encountered.
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely in France, when I was in France, I felt like there was a lot more to learn. I was very young as well.
Mm,
So I think it's very different to kind of have those experiences as a 20-year-old rather than, once you kind of have your personality and your kind of
Mm,
cultural things kind of developed a little bit more. In France, I felt a lot more friction, I guess. It was a little bit more challenging, but Spain was very, very welcoming.
mm,
Um, the problems I had when I first moved here were really like language related. It was very
mm.
frustrating because I couldn't sort of communicate with people. And this is coming from being able to speak French at the time. So, I learned
Yeah.
another language and it's like, oh my God, I've done all this work and I just
Yeah.
studied the wrong language,
Yeah.
basically. Of course, learning French made it so much easier to learn Spanish. It took me,
Yeah.
10 years or something to kind of get to a level of French that, I was able to get to in about 6 months in Spanish.
Mm,
And it wasn't because, I'm intelligent or anything. It was just
mm.
because I already had that base there and it was much easier to do that.
Yeah.
So that was really a problem. Obviously, there are cultural differences. There are cultural differences that drive me crazy to this day, and will always drive me crazy. And then at the same time, when I go to the US, there are so many things that drive me
Mm.
crazy there. And so I'm just
Yes.
angry at everything all the time. It's so much better in this other place, wherever you are, right? And
Yeah.
so I think, um, yeah, so there are some challenges there, but for the most part, culturally, I find the cultures are quite, compatible in a lot
Mm.
of ways. And so it's not a huge difference.
I guess the thing that I notice being the most different between my experiences in Spain and versus those in France is that socially it seems just a little easier to make friends, come in contact with people, stay connected, and I don't know if it has to do with being young or not, because I actually do think it's just kind of part of the culture also.
Mm.
And I know a fair amount of Spanish people also in France who are the ones who are easier to access, easier to get along with,
Yeah.
easier to kind of connect with. And it's also because they don't discriminate based on how old you are, where you came from, what you did, what you studied, who you know, you know what I mean? Like it's just easier because it's like, oh, hey, you're human. All right, let's go out,
Mhm.
right? And it's very light. And there's something cultural. Obviously, knowing a bit more about French culture, there is also, there's reasons for that. You said that you went to France initially for, was it a teaching position for?
No, it
Oh,
was it
okay.
was literally because I was like lost in my life
Oh,
and just no, and I had a friend that was it's very crazy to think about it now. I was planning actually on going to Brazil. This
oh,
is crazy. It's like crazy to think
yeah.
about it now because it's so like out of character for me now. But yeah, I
Yeah.
was like planning on going to Brazil and and I actually had a visa to work in. So I was planning to go to Brazil for a while and then go to London and work in London. I
Mm,
had a work visa for it was like 6 months or something
yeah.
to work in London. And I don't exactly remember how it happened, but I was in London and I had a friend that was in France working as an au pair. So, oh, well, I'll come down and visit
Uh,
you. And then I was there. I was like, why am I going to Brazil? I should just stay here. And that sort of was kind of how
uh,
that developed at that first time. I'd already been to
yeah.
France, to study abroad and stuff, but I was there.
Mm,
So
mm-hmm.
they are kind of different. I mean, one of my first memories of being here, coming because I came straight from France, and I
Mm.
was walking on the street and I thought, oh God, I must have something on my face. I have something on my head. People are looking at
Oh,
me. And it was
yeah.
because, of course, in France, you don't sort of make eye contact with people and you don't look at people.
Yeah.
The face is quite rude.
Yeah.
And I had kind of, without realizing that, sort of learned that.
Yeah.
And then when I
Yeah.
was here, it's like, why are people talking to me? Why are they looking at me? And, very kind of felt very almost like I was, like being aggressed against kind of. And it's like, oh
Yeah.
no, it's
Yeah.
just that I have adopted this other kind of way of being because that's the way to be. And
Yeah.
so, and seeing that cultural difference was huge at that
Yeah.
time. Yeah.
Yeah. Can we talk a little bit actually about, because you had such a strong and deep relationship with the French language before starting
Yeah.
Spanish. Is that correct, right? So can you tell us in your head how that worked out? Because I do think a lot of people take for granted the fact that there are, all right, Romance languages. Okay, so oh, not surprising, you know what I mean? Like, oh, you studied French, you study Spanish. But I will say that a lot of people I know, both native French speakers and native Spanish speakers struggle with the other side's language because it
Right.
tends to be too similar at times and too different for other reasons, right? And it's like I think also the additional challenge of it's if it's your first true foreign language and you're like,
Mhm.
I don't what, like, why is it my language, but like changed, right? So
Right.
how did it play out in your head?
So for me, yeah, so for me, French was like the language that I learned. My mom actually was a Spanish teacher.
Oh, okay.
And so she was a Spanish teacher at my high school. So that's why I did French because I couldn't
Hmm.
have bared her to be my teacher,
Oh my God.
right?
Yeah.
Like
That's so
I
funny.
couldn't have
Yeah.
handled that. Like
Yeah.
my mom and I had a like a as teenager kind of had a
Yeah.
bad a hard time. And so
Yeah.
having her like correct me would have,
Yeah.
made my head
Yeah.
explode.
Yeah.
So I did French instead.
Hmm.
Um, so, and that's kind of what happened. So yeah, and so I learned French, and it was really interesting because I was relatively okay at school. I could kind of go to classes and pick stuff up. And I had a really hard time actually in French class because um as a kid, because you had to like memorize stuff, and we at that time, and I don't know what the education system is like in the US now, but at that time in my school, in my little context,
Hmm.
there was a lot of de-emphasizing of kind of rote learning of things,
Mm.
and which is great, which is fantastic in a lot of ways, but actually rote learning to some degree in languages is very helpful.
Yeah.
And my mom actually, I was struggling, and she's like, "Oh no, you've just got to like do these flashcards, or you've got to,
Mm.
quiz yourself." And she actually helped me with that because I hadn't learned that technique. And
Yeah.
so, she did help me in that sense. But anyway, so I did French. And when I came to Spain, it helped a lot. Like it was great. It helped
Hmm.
a lot because I could just like invent stuff. So I could say, I don't know, like I remember having a conversation with someone and being like, "Oh, it's a cicatrice,"
Yeah,
inventing
exactly.
something.
Nice.
It's like, "Oh, it's
Yeah.
a cicatrice. It's a cicatrice.
Yeah.
It's the same word, right?" So you kind of get a
Yeah.
feel for it. So I didn't find them too similar. Actually, I mean, there's some things that are different, but I
Mm.
didn't find that problem. I find that with Portuguese. Like I've
Mm.
tried to learn Portuguese, it's like impossible
Mm.
because it's
Mm.
so similar that my brain can't like focus on it, kind of, because
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
why am I studying the same thing I already know?
Yeah.
I do see that between French people learning Spanish and Spanish people learning French, there is a lot more friction there. It's a lot
Yeah.
harder. Know a lot of Spanish people that have a hard time with French, partly because I think of
Yeah.
how it's taught at school and like
Yeah.
pronunciation issues.
Yeah.
That it's just different from an English speaker learning to pronounce French is different than a Spanish
Right.
native speaker, and in the other way as well, right? It's just
Yeah.
different. So yeah, I didn't have problem. I didn't find that. I found it very helpful.
Yeah, if anything, I feel like the fact that you're in like anyone who's not a native Romance language
Right,
speaker, it actually helps once you, because it's almost like you're a little more detached from it, right? And so you're like, all right, I already like figured this out, or figured it out for it doesn't matter what it is, right? Like French, Spanish, like
right,
Italian, Portuguese, like let's just like look at all of them. And okay, so when I go this route, I have to do this thing. When I go that route, I
right,
do that thing, right? And I had taken Spanish before French. I had never, oh God, never, 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 never wanted to do French ever because I was
right,
like, this is crazy. I will never, like, no one uses French in, like the US.
right,
Like, I'll never
right.
need it. Oh God. So yeah, basically, surprise. Yeah, I really feel that because there is this sense of detachment, it's something that when I talk with, let's say, other friends from Spain and they're trying to get into French and they're like, wait, like how is your brain just like attaching it and like willingly giving into this new
Right,
structure? And I'm like, I think it's because I didn't already have years of like your structure, right? Which is
right.
essentially too close. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And like for you and I, like something like, okay, learning the subjunctive, like once
Yeah.
you understand like the concept of it,
Yeah.
then you just apply it, then it's not a problem. Whereas, yeah, if you kind of like my husband, and I don't know if yours, but my husband has no idea about the concept of subjunctive. Like he
Yeah.
cannot, he's like, because it's the future, but kind of like it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And like he has no idea about that concept as a concept. And so he
Yeah.
would apply that rule in a completely different way,
Right. Yeah,
because he
yeah.
doesn't had to learn that as a concept, or something like,
Exactly.
yeah. So it's the same thing as like modal verbs or something for
Yeah.
people learning English, or phrasal verbs for people learning
Yeah.
English, that,
Yeah.
native English speakers don't even recognize that as a thing. Like they would not even know what that is because they haven't
Right.
studied it from the outside.
Yeah,
So,
and I think if I can speak for Jan, I think he's going to be like, no, it's not like this. He's going to listen to this. But I think that he understands, let's say, which tense, because, in school, they're all taught like this is a subjunctive. So you have to know. And so he can make it. And if you ask him which verb
Yeah.
form matches
Who's
to
after
X or
this
what,
thing? Yeah.
yeah, he can do it. If you ask him to explain what subjunctive means, that's
Yeah.
where it all breaks down. It's like, oh, but it's like, yeah, and it's exactly
Right.
like what your
Yeah.
husband probably says, like, yeah, it's kind of like this, but also it's not really like that. And it's like, oh God. So like
Right.
definitely, I think that it's also the reason why you and I know this, but I think it's worth mentioning that native speakers, while very, 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 very helpful for all of the sort of natural ways communication and language happen, may not be the ones who can give you the exact explanation, because that's what you learn in your certification program. That's what you,
Right.
when you do a degree, that's what you learn from the outside perspective, in a way, what your language is about, so that you can better explain it to others.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. It's
And
all
then
about qualification, not about
yeah, yeah,
training. Hmm.
yeah. So in Spain, are there things that you have seen, access to language classes,
Good.
or just the way that a language is, if you, a language like English, how that's seen in society?
Right.
Maybe we can go into that.
Yeah, I think it's really important. So I had a social media post on Threads actually kind of go viral
Mm,
a while ago, and it was about a client of mine who studied. Her English is fantastic. Her English is probably easily a C1, if not a C2. You would speak to her,
mm,
wouldn't realize for after a while, you'd realize that she wasn't a native English speaker, but you would
mm.
assume she was
Yeah,
Dutch or something, Scandinavian or something,
yeah.
that has a really, really high level of English. And we met because we were working on preparing a job interview. And she ended up getting this job at a very, very important American company, but based in Madrid.
Mm,
And she started her job, was very excited, very, very nervous. It was her dream job. And she's doing the onboarding session with her, human resources person. And she's, oh, so I can find this information in the platform.
mhm,
And the human resources person says, yeah, so it's on the platform. And
mm,
my client just goes into this like spiral
mm.
because she had used in the platform rather than on the platform. And
Oh,
this sort of like spiraled her kind of imposter syndrome and all of these
mm,
things. Um, because she's like, oh my God, I can't speak English. This person thinks I'm an idiot. I can't do
oh,
this. And so she kind of shut down completely and like didn't participate in meetings and things, actually had her boss like talk to
oh,
her and be like, what's going on? You were
wow.
so great in this interview. What's happening? And, she comes to me. She's like, I need to learn all the prepositions. I need to learn all of
Oh,
this stuff. Right.
yeah.
And eventually, she got out of it. She kind of reframed the whole problem because the problem wasn't the preposition, of course. It was the
Mhm,
fact that she, um, had sort of, these like limiting beliefs that she had. And she just
mm,
assumed that everybody thought she was an idiot because she
mm.
mistaked a letter. Like it's not
Yeah,
even like,
yeah, yeah.
right. So this post kind of goes viral. And I think we can all kind of see like, that it's relatable in a certain way that, your imposter syndrome can get so out of hand, basically,
Mm,
that it kind of really stifles your progress. And a lot of Americans actually responded to this, like, oh, I wouldn't even notice. And I mean, that was my reaction.
mm,
I wouldn't have even noticed that.
mm,
But I think what is really important and what was missing from that conversation, that because it's social media and everything gets collapsed, and, what's missing from that, she wasn't interacting with native English speakers in any way.
mm,
She was working with other non-native
mm.
English speakers in a global society, in
Yeah,
a global, using English as a global language.
yeah,
And that your English level in that situation very often is seen as a proxy for your status and education level.
yeah.
And part of that, here in Spain, very, very much, and I've been part of this, my entire career, families that have extra, have disposable income will send their children to English classes after school, expensive English classes after school. They'll
Mm,
send them to Ireland in the summer. They'll send them to private schools where English education is, they're getting education in English. So English
mm,
is a status symbol. So it has nothing to do with like her identity as an
mm,
English speaker.
mm,
That imposter syndrome is not necessarily just that. It's not her identity as an English speaker. It's her identity as, her status.
Yeah.
as a professional.
Yeah.
And she's very, very concerned about, how she is seen in that way. They're going to think that I am not, her belief was they're going to
Yeah.
think that I'm not well educated enough
Yeah.
to hold this position because I've
Yeah.
made this one mistake in English.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's very that kind of is missing from that, that post basically, is
Mm,
this broader context that this person finds themselves in. And
right.
in Spain, that's very, very much the case. I think English proficiency is seen in this broader socioeconomic context that is not
Yeah.
fitting in. It's very different context from someone moving to England or someone moving
Yeah.
or immigrating to the United States.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the problems that I see a lot with social media, especially,
Yeah.
is that these contexts kind of get collapsed and people have different goals. And then you start arguing about these things. And it's like, no, no, but hold on, the actual goal is different here.
Yeah.
The goal for my client is to sort of operate in English in a global context, has nothing to do with
Yeah.
talking to native speakers
Yeah.
at all, which
Yeah.
is completely different from someone who is going to immigrate to the United States or to
Right.
Ireland or whatever. It's a completely different,
Yeah.
you have different goals there. And so how you're going to approach that is different. And so then people, argue about things online about, what this means, what that means. Well, actually, we're playing different games.
Yeah. Yeah.
So stop kind of criticizing whatever this person has chosen to do. They just have a different goal from you.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think is maybe, not as clear from the outside.
Yeah. I think it's really clear for the people who have to come in contact with people like you and I, right? Every single day and every single
Right.
week and every like and all of, a handful of other people online who also are exposed to this. But I would completely agree that it's something that I think people don't even see that they default to a certain context, like a base context.
Right.
So for instance, oh, English. Oh, non-native. Oh, of course, it's to survive, the catastrophe that is American society, or just so
Right.
difficult because I don't know accents. And it's like, no, that's not even
Right.
in play here. It's not even, like you said, it's not even the same game. It's not the same rules. I realized in talking with many of my friends, who still I don't think they understand what my
Right.
company is about or what it is I do,
Right.
because they think in their heads it's like, oh yeah, like you just like teach English. And I'm like, you really you don't
Right.
see at all. Like it's not even I can't even begin to explain how many factors you can't see because you've never lived outside of your country. You've never had to learn a new language.
Right.
You've never had to adapt into something that is unprecedented for the entire world, because many of these people, if you're connecting remotely, right, you are able to access how many other
Right.
types of people, groups of people, nationalities, cultures, ethnicities, whatever, languages. And I love that you said English as a proxy, because that's exactly what it is. That's exactly you can only use this, right? And so everyone's just kind of trading with this, right?
Right.
It's like, I mean, I hate to say it's currency, but it's kind of communication currency, right? And so the way that you go about it is also tied into what you've already lived, what your society
Exactly.
showed you, right, from probably an early age. And what's really interesting is when you see that none of that lines up, right, because of course the way it works in Spanish society is different from another country, and
Absolutely.
there's generational stuff as well. And yeah,
Mhm.
so this is a great, I'm so gonna clip this and put it for our promo, because I remember that post, and I remember us talking a little bit about it as well. It's difficult on social media to get all this
Right.
out there, right? And that's why podcasts, that's why other supporting,
Yeah.
information. And it's okay. Like social media, we understand is superficial,
Right. And
but
I think it's necessarily by default, of course, like the whole thing is it just collapses
yeah,
it collapses everything.
yeah,
Um, and it was very interesting because I, had so that, some responses was like, oh, well, I learned whatever, I learned German and I just went and just ignored making mistakes and just, did
yeah,
this. It's like, well, that's great for you. I'm really happy for you. That's just not like, you're kind
yeah,
of missing, I don't say this because it just ends up being, too much of an extra work or something. I'm not
mhm,
quite sure how to do that, but it's like, this is, you're sort of missing the point. It's not mirrored directly.
yeah. Yeah.
And I think that with English, especially, it's not necessarily mirrored directly, because
Yeah.
English is the global language at the moment. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is. It shows a lot. Yeah, and most of the people I work with, again, I would say it's probably. I want to ask you about this actually because I feel like it might be a little bit different from your context as
Mm-hmm.
well. I most of the people that I work with, I'm the only native English speaker that they ever
Mm,
really like come into contact with. They
mm,
are, you know, at least maybe 25% of their interactions are with native English speakers. The rest of them are, you know, people that are using English as a global language, and so their needs are completely different.
yeah.
The game they're playing is completely different from
Mm,
someone, you know, from me living in Spain, completely
yeah.
different from my
Yeah.
experience learning Spanish to live in Spain. It's a completely different game they're playing. And so kind of it doesn't mirror itself exactly. Is that the same
Mm.
for you? Do you
For my work, it really depends on the person because people have, and what's interesting is when you stay long enough with a client and you see the evolution of their, like, their career path, and you're like, oh, so you changed teams. Oh, interesting. And everything is different
right?
now because it's all reshuffled and your new manager is Australian.
Right.
And what
Exactly. Yeah.
I, like it's native speaker, but it's not the same type of native
Right?
speaker, right? So, for me personally, I would say I'm not necessarily the only native speaker. There are people who work for companies that are based in the US, but
Right.
they have divisions outside. But I am probably the one who is going to be the most honest, meaning I'm going to be the one who is telling them or asking them to clarify when they aren't
Right.
necessarily like finishing a thought, or because we've developed that personal relationship and I can flip on that native side and the non-native side and be like, okay, and so here's how we tackle that, right?
Right.
Versus I do have a couple people, or I've had, who the 1 hour that we had together was the only hour, right, of the week where they would speak with somebody in all English and
Mhm.
all like native style, let's say. And I don't know. I do think that it's a little more challenging sometimes to work with people who have such limited exposure. It's not they can't choose, right?
Yeah,
But
right. Yeah.
sometimes it is difficult because they will want to not necessarily default to another language because maybe we have another one in common, right? Even if it's
Hmm.
something like French, like I've told you before, I have this rule where like it's all English because it's 1 hour of your life and
Of course.
we
Yeah.
have to
Yeah.
facilitate the learnings that you'll be working on and all that. But I do feel that there is more resistance sometimes because they have to be willing to put their brains in this context with me. And because I am the only one, it is so uncomfortable to spend that time and do it for, sustain it for an hour versus if they were able to act. And I do tell them, I'm like, can you make a friend? Can you make a
Yeah.
friend online, so that I'm not the only person? Because it's a lot of not just responsibility, it's too heavy, I feel, when they have to context change like this, like and in and then out. And then, I send them a message and they have to do it again.
Right. And I think your job in that case, of what I'm understanding, please correct me, is very much giving guided feedback. And that is
Yeah.
sort of your role, is giving that
Yeah.
feedback and correct, not necessarily
Yeah.
correcting in the you said this wrong way, but
Yeah.
requiring them to level up.
Yeah.
Whereas, and that's a different process than kind of gaining fluency and just
Yeah.
sort of automatizing, which is
Yeah.
something that you would definitely be doing more with a friend, more with someone that you can just kind of chat with. And those
Yeah.
processes are very different, right?
Yeah.
Your goals are to stretch their range, stretch their
Yeah.
accuracy, stretch their communicative
Yeah.
ability.
Yeah.
Where with a friend, it's kind of practicing and putting those setting those neural pathways basically,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
that they're sort of move faster. And I think those are two different
Yeah.
goals. And so
Yeah.
having at least two different people you're practicing that with
Yeah.
makes sense. I think that's
Yeah.
logical.
Yeah, and even just if you think about what they'll encounter later on, right? Because it's not necessarily career training or development, but it's
Right.
always oriented that way, right? So it's like, all right, do you want the first time that you talk to a group of native speaking people to be at the interview that you go to
Right.
for a new job? Like I think it's better to kind of work that in beforehand. And these are conversations I can have with them, right? That encourage good habit building in the process
I love it.
of where they go. But it's also it's not everyone takes the feedback. Let's just be honest, you know, like
No, I mean, and I would be terrible. I would fight you every moment through that. I know
yeah,
as a learner, I
yeah,
tend to, yeah, I find that very uncomfortable, very, very
yeah,
useful, but you know, I'd be very
yeah.
uncomfortable in that
Wait,
sense.
let's lean into this because I actually think it's a good opportunity to talk
Yeah,
about something I've seen come on your posts a lot. So, your, I'm going to call it your love or your rather learned love, maybe, of using writing as a way
yeah,
to make progress, which a lot of people complain about. And I
yeah,
would say the same. If I had to write long essays, I would
right.
not actually, I would not do
Yeah,
them.
not be
So,
something you would look forward to, right?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
So can we talk about kind of how or why you want to push into that, why you encourage and why you feel it's so
right.
important?
Well, I think writing, for me, again, my personal preference for writing just in any language is sort of clarifying those thoughts and clarifying, you know, it's a great way to sort of clarify what you're thinking and not just kind of vomit, you know, whatever kind of comes to the top of your head, right?
Hmm.
So there's that part of it that as a personal preference, it's something that I really enjoy. But as a from a teaching perspective, it's something that I've seen really, really, really transform my
Mm.
students' English level. So, writing has some benefits that speaking doesn't have, right? And so, some of them are basically that you have time to
Yeah.
you know you have time to go back and see what you've written, you have time to look up new words, you have time to sort of organize your thoughts. And for a language, learning a language, that's great. I have time to sort of check to see if this word is masculine or feminine,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
if you know whatever it is, or how do I say this. I have time to do that. I also have a list. I mean, I can look through my diary. You and I have talked about this. Like,
Hmm.
I look at my like diaries, my journals from when I lived in France, and it's like cringe city, both on like the, you know, I was like 22 years old. So of course it's going to be cringy in that way, but it's
Yeah.
also like the French is just atrocious. But
Mm.
it's great because I can see sort of the like the progression, right, of
Hmm.
that. You also have this really kind of controlled environment where you can practice, you can input, you know, I've learned this new phrase and I want to kind of like try it out. You can sort of try it out. And again, this is expanding that range, that your accuracy and your range as you're writing, which is much more difficult to do in speaking.
Hmm.
You can do it in speaking, of course. I mean, I recommend that with my students. They'll have like their little game for the week, right? On their post-it, they'll have like some expressions they want to like
Mm.
try to use in their meetings or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's kind of their, you know, homework or whatever. And it's kind of fun, and but it's much more difficult to do that because if the occasion to use that expression doesn't arise, you just don't get
Yeah.
to use it. Whereas
Yeah.
with writing, you can do that. And so I've seen it really transform my students' English ability. I worked in a private language school for,
Mm.
you know, most of my career.
Mm.
And to kind of go back to that, you know, English is a proxy kind of thing in
Mm.
Spain, which is, I think, different from France. Please, again, correct me if
Mm.
I'm wrong here. In Spain, it was very, very typical to send your kids to after school English classes. So they would go
Mm.
to school, you know, have English at school. And then if you had disposable income, you would spend money to send your kids to an after school program where they would learn English, generally with native English teachers.
Mm.
Right? And so this whole idea, this belief of this native teacher supremacy
Mm.
was sort of born from this and sort of
Mm.
perpetuated by the
Mm.
market. And so, you know, and I was one of those native English speakers.
Yeah.
It's completely illegal to advertise that you have native English speaker teachers. It's
Mm.
completely illegal. It's, you know, it's kind of gone. It's been a huge controversy kind of in my
Mm.
little sector,
Mm.
you know, for the past 15 years.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, so that entire kind of system kind of got perpetuated. And so these kids would come and would be at school in these English classes from the time they're like 6 until they're like
Mm.
18,
Mm. Wow.
and
Yeah.
come in, you know, do 3 hours of English a week. And with the expectation that throughout that process, they're getting certifications.
Yeah.
So they're getting a B1 certificate, they're getting a B2,
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
C1, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's sort of how Spanish job searches and things kind of work. There's a lot of kind of, much like France in that sense. Like you
Yeah.
have to have the
Yeah.
certification to,
Where's your paper? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And so that's part of it, it's this bigger system. And so in those exams, you have to do writing, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
writing as a section of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so you'd prepare your students for this writing section, and which makes sense. Um, but you'd also, but there's also like this sense of like preparing younger kids to write a diary. There's one of my friends who was a trainer. She started a whole program called the English Diaries. And so these kids are
Mm-hmm.
maybe 9, 10 years old. They would start the term, and they'd start the year with their little diaries with the marketing and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And they would start by writing 5 sentences in the past about what they did at the weekend. I
Mm-hmm.
went to grandma's house, I ate,
Yeah.
whatever. I played with my friends, I did this. And the next weekend they would do the same thing. And the next weekend you'd teach them to put linking words in there. I went to grandma's house
Mm-hmm.
and I ate
Yeah.
da da da.
Yeah.
And you do that for about a month. And then you would get them to add in negative sentences and all
Yeah.
of this. It's very, very, for little kids.
Yeah.
But they were forced to kind of practice this. And it
Yeah.
sort of expanded. And so
Yeah.
I was teaching those level kids, but once I was teaching older people, adults, and teaching teenagers, kind of use a similar process, not about the past and not so kind of set up, but it's like, okay, let's see, can you write this text using these words? Can
Mm.
you, and then they'd give me the text. I underline the mistakes or underline things that aren't great. I don't correct them, and then
Mm-hmm.
do it again. And then you
Mm-hmm.
redraft. And then it would be really
Mm-hmm.
interesting because by the end of the course, not only were they able to sort of write much better, but they were able to include a lot of that grammar, vocabulary, all of that
Yeah.
range really, really expanded. Of
Yeah.
course, we're practicing speaking in class. Of course, we're
Yeah.
practicing all these other things, but the writing is sort of this evidence
Yeah.
that, and this sort of kind of, you know, hard copy of
Mhm.
that process and being able to see that. And so
Yeah.
I really, really think it's transformative and something
Mhm.
that, I really encourage. My
Yeah.
students don't want to do it. Um, Generally, yeah, and they are the people that are, now the students that I work with now generally are, working in English. I'm like, this is not writing an email. We're not talking about that. Use
Mhm.
AI for that. That's fine.
Mhm. Mhm.
We're talking about the process of
Mhm.
writing. We're talking about using it to improve your English and your thoughts. I don't care if anybody else sees it.
Yeah.
It's not the writing, the email,
Mhm.
um, that is useful or is important. In this particular case, that's not why we're doing it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I really believe in writing. And you're
Yeah.
right, like writing an essay is one thing. Writing a
Mhm.
journal article, a journal article, sorry, like a journal entry about
Yeah.
what you did the weekend in a language you're learning is difficult. It requires effort, but it actually helps you to sort of automatize that
Yeah.
language. So that's why.
So we're completely on the same page, by the way, that it's a good exercise and that it's like something that is very, in terms of how you can kind of make a cognitive foundation. I call it like cognitive architecture. People think I
Sure.
use like fancy terms for no reason. It's not for no reason. It's literally because of the background I have. It's like I
Right.
can't, right? I will be honest, I have a kind of hide the vegetables way around it because I work with only adults, right? And
Uh-huh.
they are a very, very, very special group of like a special demographic, especially those who are generally, they're if they are not working in some leadership position, they're not
Yeah.
far away, right? So
Right.
meaning
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
that they're not used to being told what to do. And
Right.
you become a trainer for somebody who is
Yeah.
normally in that more kind of dominant role in the workplace. How do you guide them? And so the way that I go about it, and what's so funny is like I try to really not put together the podcast world with the trading world. And I also think no one has the time to listen. So hopefully, hopefully they don't hear
They,
this.
they don't learn your secrets.
Yeah.
They don't learn your.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But truthfully, if I say to them writing, they would never, like
Yeah.
I know for sure. So what I do, a lot of the work I do is very scenario based. And if we do any sort of like more grammar stuff, any tense stuff, it's always in the scenarios that are represent their real life, right?
Right.
And so what's funny is they are writing. They're writing exactly what you talked about, like, looking at the different tenses. And actually, I do a lot of these kind of variation exercises where they have to, like, flip it around as many times as possible, because I have to be clear that they know what they're choosing, when they're choosing it, how so it's like it's a big mental exercise. But they also like it because it's very complex and it's stretching them, and they don't feel like they're being forced into an academic space, which I think a
Mhm.
lot of people have
Right.
horrible memories of,
Yes.
teachers being like, you must write 10 sentences on this topic, like, or else you can't go
Right.
to lunch, right? So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I feel that because it's a little bit, I don't know, because it's hidden, right? Because I'm basically not telling them that it's essentially writing. They will take it on themselves sometimes to create additional sentences, paragraphs, and then
Yeah.
build from that. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. So you marked, because I have them do like an evaluation of themselves before they start with
Yeah.
me, and they'll be like, oh, I hate writing, like no, 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 like do
Yeah.
not do this, and I'm like, what's funny is if you put all these paragraphs together, you've kind of made yourself a nice essay out of this. Like,
Yeah.
like did you
Right.
realize that? And
Right.
now we can start looking at global sentence structure, not even sentence structure, paragraph structure. We can look at how
Yeah.
your logic is flowing. And because many of them, maybe not for an email, but let's say
Mm.
you have to put out a company memo. Are you going to be able to do that, right? Very quickly? With
Right. And use
AI, maybe, but not really at the same way. No.
right. And you have to also, I think there's a huge, I mean, we won't go into this like whole thing, but
Yeah.
like AI obviously being very, very biased towards sort of like a very American sort of
Yes.
logic. And
Yes.
so, which is appropriate if you are working in that sort of context, but may not be appropriate in other
Yes.
context. And so, being really clear about what you want to get from,
Mm,
being having a good model so that if you do use AI to tidy things up or to, whatever, you're able to judge that.
yeah.
I mean, this is not something I plan on talking about, but I'd be really interested. So I'm kind of putting this out. If it does make it to the podcast, people get in touch with me.
Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
teaching, I was teaching these actual French kids, these kids from France, this past couple of weeks. So they come to do a study abroad. They're business school students that come
Mm,
to study abroad here in Spain, and their
mm,
program is in English. It's not in Spanish. And
okay.
so the first module is business English. Right.
Mm,
So essentially, in the idea to kind of prepare them for the
mm,
next modules in,
mm,
digital marketing or whatever they're
mm,
doing that are in English, right? And for years and years and years, I mean, for years and years, this is the third time I've done it. And in other kind of similar courses I've done, they write a CV, they write a resume, write a CV, and then we do sort of interview questions, and that's kind of the end of the module, right? And this year, I had to change absolutely everything
mm,
because why would you learn to write a CV? I'm not going to, I use AI to
mm,
generate my CV, right? I'm
mm,
going to use ChatGPT. Like why would
mm,
I not do that? Obviously I
yeah.
know what a good CV looks like, but of course I'm going to use that. And so I can't expect them to, go through this whole like
Mm,
slog of like learning how to, write stuff in, do we use passive voice? How do we write this profile?
yeah.
How do we do this? Right.
Yeah.
And so it's just really interesting, like that those demands change.
Mm,
And one of the writing texts that I always have them do is to write a response to a client complaint. And I did that this year. And towards the end, I was like, I shouldn't have done that. That was stupid. That was
yeah.
absolutely stupid because no one is ever going to, not no one, but you really don't need to learn how to do that.
Mm,
You need to learn how to create the prompt to put that in so that
mm,
you get like a you are making decisions. And just
mm,
really interesting how from one year to the next that
mm,
entire exercise, the entire section of life is kind of like we don't need to do this anymore. We need to approach this in a different way.
mm,
And saying that, the writing, I'm not going to teach them how to write a client complaint letter in the future or a covering letter or something like that in the future. But I do need to, you know, writing is still valuable. Writing as an
yeah.
exercise
Yeah.
itself is still valuable. And like you said, I love that of sort of answer these questions, like the reflection questions, right? Yeah, and you're kind of putting
Yeah.
them in, getting
Yeah.
them to do that in a certain way. Um,
Yeah.
that is they're writing, but they're thinking about something and they're using writing
Yeah.
to clarify their thinking, which is the whole thing, right? It's not the
Yeah.
essay, it's the
Yeah.
yeah.
I do think that there are other skills that you could still learn from something like a client complaint
Oh,
exercise. I do think,
absolutely,
like,
yeah.
because they'll have to speak, they'll have to still engage, right? And if you can't
Right.
create the response. And even
Right.
if you can ask an AI to create it, if you don't know what it's creating, and this is always the pushback that I think most people are giving inside of the industry. And this was happening, by the way, with me even before ChatGPT came out. I think I don't remember, it was like a few years back, and some, so, some article broke out. And because I work with like so many tech people, like everyone's like
Right.
reading
They're
the
already
tech news.
using like yeah.
And
Uh-huh.
everyone's like, okay, so like, do you think you'll still be around? Because like, you're just going to be
Yeah.
replaced. And I was like, you need to like, first of all, approach this better, because that is not the way to ask the question. Number
Right.
two, it's very, very interesting, because I think if you know anything about, or we can all see a little bit, right? ChatGPT is great, but it's not perfect. And
Of
you still
course.
have to edit a lot, even if what it's given you is not a bad start.
Right.
How will you do this if you don't already
Yeah.
know how, what you want at the end, how to modify it,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that was literally the conversation I had with these students is, I approached it with the CV, with the
Mm,
CV writing. We sat down, we did sort of we listened to some different videos, clips of videos of different HR people talking about how do they accept, how they
mm.
feel about, CVs written by AI that you can tell are written by
Yeah.
AI, and different approach. And we talked about it and like how to kind of get that balance right. And they were really, in the CV writing aspect, they were really sensible. They're like 20 years old and they sort of, were really sensible about that. And
Mhm,
they had some great CVs. I mean, in terms of like
mm,
formatting and stuff like
mm,
that, and sort of knowing what needs to go where and all of that. And
yeah,
ChatGPT definitely helped them.
yeah,
But they knew what they needed to include, and
mm,
and they did a great job with that. With the client complaint letter, yes, I completely agree. Of course, it wasn't, we did a whole module on dealing with client complaints, which is
yeah,
different, and making decisions based on all of
mm,
that. But the actual letter, the
yeah,
generation of the
mm,
thanks to your goodwill with us for a number of
mm,
like those kinds of words and that kind of
mm,
wording. Yes, knowing what sounds okay is there, and knowing that it doesn't have to be as fancy as it would be in French, for
mm.
example.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm waiting. It's like
yeah. Yes, and I like,
yeah,
have you
bowing
seen
to
the, yeah,
you.
bowing to you? You're like,
Yeah,
oh my God, yeah, I have to. It's
right.
a whole separate topic we'll talk about later.
Yeah, exactly. But
Yeah.
and having them understand that and having a good example is great. But I don't think in the future I will have them kind of, because I get them to essentially memorize little like formulaic
Mm,
phrases, right?
mhm.
That you and I,
Do.
looking
Yeah,
forward to hearing
yeah,
from you. You know
yeah,
that phrase, like you
yeah,
use that, and so kind
yeah.
of memorizing some of that formulaic language that you can use
Mhm,
anywhere. I
mhm,
don't think I'll approach it in that way in the future. I don't know how I'll approach it, but
mm,
I don't think that that's sort of the approach that I will take, because I think it's sort of a waste of time when there's other things
mm,
that could be used better. The whole thing with Love to Lingo sort of started um, again with my experience as a language teacher in this after school kind of classes. And years ago, I had this student, sort of be the beginning of my career. The student name was Sophia, and Sophia was the ideal kid. She came into class every time, on time. She always participated. She did her homework. She raised her hand. She did everything that you're like supposed to do, right? In a class.
mm,
The problem was Sophia was failing. Like
mm,
she had a really, really hard time. She could do like the grammar exercises just fine. Anything that was really structured, she could do, but she couldn't sort of speak English. Like she couldn't kind of
mm,
put it together on her own. And sort of in the midterm, I had to have a meeting with her mom basically to say, look, like this is the situation. And I was talking to my director at the time, and she said, well, what are you going to tell her that she needs to do? And I was like, I don't know. This girl's doing everything she's like supposed to do. Like on paper,
mm,
she's ideal, right?
mm.
She is fantastic. Like, and I don't know what the problem is. I don't have a clue what the problem is, or you know, how to treat her problem. Almost sort of like a
Yeah,
doctor kind of,
yeah,
what I can't diagnose it, and I don't know how to help her.
yeah.
She's already going to school, English at school. She's coming here for 3 hours a week. We have her on these like she has these private like tutoring lessons that are like,
Mm,
an extra half an hour. Like I can't I don't know what else to do. And so I had this very uncomfortable conversation with her mom, basically telling her that, and we managed to get her to pass and all this stuff. And it was really frustrating because in her class, there was this kid, Diego, who was friends with her, same class at school. They'd been in the English class together from like 6 years old, same, again, on paper, really similar. Diego did nothing. He did nothing,
mm,
Michelle. He sat there, he spoke in Spanish with all of his friends all the time. And you try to catch him out and be like, Diego, what's the answer to number 6? You know, he'd say B, like, and he knew what it was. Like, he
Mm,
was like, you know, and he was great. Did no
mm,
studying, never did his homework. I had
mm,
to talk to his mom about him like not working.
mm,
And he was fine. He did great. He was fantastic at using English.
mm,
And I was like, what is this difference?
mm,
Why is
mm,
Diego like this and
mm.
poor Sophia like this? And it
Yeah,
makes, you know, and how can I teach Sophia to be more like Diego?
yeah.
You know, why is he finding it so much easier than Sophia? And I don't mean it in a sort of like, oh, there's some like magical, like magic
Mm,
wand thing, but in
mm,
this kind of like, well, why, what is this
mm,
mystery? Why is this
mm,
happening?
mm,
And so I did a master's degree
mm,
basically, because I felt like I didn't have enough knowledge and understanding to kind of help Sophia really, and
mhm,
people like her, of course.
mhm.
And of course, and as you know, when you go and do sort of more advanced degrees, like it doesn't answer any questions, it just creates more
More?
and more and
Yeah.
more questions,
Yeah.
which is definitely the case for me. But
Mm,
it's been really interesting because I've really become just so interested in these kind of individual differences, right?
mm,
You know, how, you know, what are some of those differences? And it's this complex system, right? It's this
mhm,
complex system of variables. It's not intelligence, it's
mm.
not, you know, necessarily, you know, motivation, it's not all of these things, it's
Yeah,
how those things
yeah,
interact with each other.
yes.
And
Mm,
so it's not necessarily an easy treatment either.
mhm,
And so, you know, kind of going through this, and once I sort of understood this bigger picture, that there isn't like, you know, the magic bullet. There's not like this one thing that it is. I sort of started approaching language classes in a different way,
mm,
teaching language.
mm,
And so I went into these classes instead. I used to do sort of, you know, really kind of cheesy but typical kind of class at the beginning of the year where you know, set the rules for your class, right? And I
mm,
used to do it with, you know, different colors of paper. So in English class we must, and the kids would sort of brainstorm some ideas. In
mm,
English class we can't, and they would brainstorm and all these things, right? And one year I said, okay, well, I'm going to come in, and instead of doing an English class, I'm going to change the question, and it's going to be, good language learners must,
mm,
da, 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 da. Good language learners can, da, 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 da.
mm,
And we kind of created this atmosphere of my goal being, I don't care what you guys get on your exams. I don't care. We're not going
mm,
to focus on that as the outcome. Like, that is not our, you know, our KPI, if you
mhm,
will.
mhm.
What we're looking at here is, how can I help you become the best language learners possible? My
Yeah,
goal as a teacher
yeah,
is to help you learn. You've used this before, this idea too, like learn these habits, learn these
mhm,
kind of approaches to language learning. So once you come out of, you know, our little time together, our year together,
yeah,
whatever, you're able to go about that, the language learning process, in a different way.
yeah,
And you're able to, if you are Sophia, you're able to use your agency, your accountability to sort of solve that problem and figure it out. You know, Sophia was 12 years old, so it's not, you know, on her. But if
yeah,
I could teach Sophia again, I would hopefully be able to equip her with some of those like
mm,
metacognitive skills of like
mhm,
evaluating
mhm,
what's working, what isn't working, and try
mhm.
to sort of find a solution to that, to get out of this, right? And to become
Yeah,
the best language learner possible.
yeah,
And, you know, it worked in the sense that I never went back after that. You know, that was sort
mm,
of the approach I've taken to uh, language teaching or language coaching, sort of from
mm,
then on, was very
mhm,
much sort of, let's help people become the best language learners they can be.
yeah,
And that means something different for different people.
yeah,
And that's totally fine.
yeah,
And so LoveToLingo is very much sort of born out of that idea, and with that mission, right? Empowering language learners to sort of make those decisions and to, you know, be accountable for their own learning and use their own agency
yeah,
for learning. Um, and that's it. And it might not, my journey might look totally different from your journey, and it might
mhm,
look totally different. And then, you know, if we both go into learning Italian, it might be different. But if
mhm,
we both go into learning German, it might be similar, you know, and
yeah,
my husband's journey learning German will be different. And that's
mhm,
totally fine. And
mhm,
where we are in each step of the way is going to be different, and that's
mhm,
okay. But if we have a little bit of an understanding about how we operate as learners,
yeah,
we can reach those goals, we can, we can achieve things. And so that's sort of, that is
Mm,
the whole idea of Love to Lingo.
yeah.
And sort of the different manifestations of that. And some of them are sort of stories, and some of it is podcasts and sort of informing and giving people some sort of background insight about how languages are learned, so they're able to
Mm,
sort of make those decisions for themselves. So yeah, I mean, I think, for example, I listened to your podcast with Sean, like the first one that you
mm,
had, and both of you kind of comparing how you've sort of figured out your own method of
yeah.
learning a
Yeah.
language, and that's absolutely valid. And there's no one to tell you like, oh, you didn't do that in the correct way.
Yeah. Yeah.
You used your agency and your accountability to figure it out for yourself in a way that made sense for you.
Yeah.
And your way might not make any sense to me at all,
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
totally fine.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
need to, have the skills to be able to make those decisions. So yeah, that's the idea with Love to Lingo. In up until really recently, the only way you could learn a language was going to kind of structured formal classes, and having a teacher teach you, you know, expose you to this level of vocabulary and
Mhm.
this kind of grammar and this kind of thing. Obviously, that's not the case now.
Yeah.
It's not the case now. And so
Mm.
sometimes there's like an information overload, and what do I do? Do I just
Mm.
go with a teacher? Do I just have this teacher? And I've got students that definitely they want me to do that. They want to like delegate all of the decision making to me,
Yeah.
which I feel quite uncomfortable with. But
Yeah.
that's their
Mm.
beliefs. That's fine. That's how
Mhm.
they believe about things. And we talk about things a little bit, but I do make a lot of those decisions. And that
Mm.
settles them into feeling like they are able to make progress. And there's nothing
Mhm.
wrong with that.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, that's the overall.
So good because it's stuff that people I think need to hear more of because if this were the norm, neither of us would be here right now. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Neither of us would be trying to do podcasts and put out more information and showing up every single day and trying to just engage in more conversation because this is unfortunately not the norm. This is not the way, and we can talk all we want about education systems being broken and,
Hmm.
reform being slow. Yeah, but also on that individual level, it is not
Yeah.
currently in the culture of the, I think, language learning industry, but also just the mindset, right, of being a language learner. It's always sort of this almost commercialized way of, all right, so got to do this, got to find that, got to like go for the formula, right? Got to like unlock the formula that
It's
will
the
work. Yeah,
unlocking. Yeah.
unlocking. Yeah. Um, I just there's something in between where I do agree that it is a little bit of unlocking, right? You have to unlock what works for you.
Sure.
But I just feel it's confusing when it's portrayed, especially with people who are, I think the section of the internet I have the most issue with is the people who are polyglots trying to sell their method that worked for them,
Right.
but say that it will definitely work for everyone. Because we have been down this road with Slim Fast. We've been down this road with Jenny Craig. We've been, you know what I mean? Like we have literally found every
Right.
single I don't know. I thought we broke this model of one size fits all, right? But
Right.
I don't think enough people have been talking about it with this level of honesty and maybe just transparency, right, on these topics. Because I do think, I don't know how you feel on this, but I feel many people, if they're working for a language school or they're, you have a reputation to protect and you kind of don't want to go out there and be like, oh, everything my school has had me do for the last X number of years has been total crap because I hate going into the classroom and evaluating people and
Right.
making them, think that their worth is based on whatever their level is. And I do think we're in a new time of empowerment also in the professional sense, right? In the industry, like you
Mm.
can be a very well qualified, knowledgeable professional
Mm.
and still have your own kind of agency and ideas on how we can push to be better, right? It's like
Right.
this is like I hope it will grow, but I unfortunately don't see at this present moment beyond you, me, beyond a couple of people I found,
Right.
right? That it's this like there's momentum there. I do think that if you I think it's a good idea. I think a lot of people talk about it. I just see very few people doing something about it, right? So Love to Lingo is something that you've decided to do about it in like an actionable, concrete way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it is a, so in terms of language, so learner training was a huge, well, huge, maybe not huge. It was a lot. It was a huge area of interest sort of at the beginning of the 2000s.
Mm.
There's a lot of research about, again, like this kind of where I'm stuck
Mm,
mentally is kind of beginning of the 2000s.
mm,
And there was included, I've got some copies even of like language books that there was kind of in the teacher's notes, they were like, oh, train your learners to use a
yeah.
dictionary in this way and this kind of thing. And then sort of that got taken over by like CD-ROMs, by technology. And
Yeah.
so the school, so the publishers would, say, well, we're going to get rid of this. We have to like
Yeah.
eliminate something. We're going to eliminate this
Mm,
and put a CD-ROM, so
mm,
people can practice, the vocabulary in that way or
mhm.
whatever. Right. And then it kind of got just completely like shoved aside and kind of, and now everything, is evolving in a different way. So now it's not like the book is the CD-ROM, like there's no
Mm,
CD-ROMs, but
yeah.
got
Yeah.
overtaken by technology. So I think that there is, the idea of like learner training and stuff does, what did exist, it just kind of
Yeah.
lost the battle to technology and
Mm,
in that sense.
yeah.
And I think what I see from my sector, again, in Spain, the language school sector is huge. It's a huge
Mm,
moneymaker. It's huge. I think in terms of like European markets for especially English language teaching, I would imagine Spain is, if not the biggest, it's one of the biggest
mm,
sectors.
mm,
So people absolutely are changing. There's a lot
mm,
of change in
mm,
in from my point of view, what I
mhm,
see. There's a
mhm,
huge amount of change there.
mhm,
And I mean, and in my personal experience, again, when I'm running this language school, have level tests and you're a consultant essentially. People come in and say, I need to do
mm,
something. How do I do this?
yeah.
And those consultations completely changed from the beginning of my experience there to the end. People now
Yeah.
know how to do certain things. They know they have a lot more knowledge and a lot more empowerment about
Mhm,
what to do. And
mhm,
unfortunately, in some ways, they're a lot more demanding
yeah.
because of this. But
Mm,
I think that there's a sort of reason for that. Like once they have enough knowledge, but they're trying to fit into this like old model, but they don't.
yeah.
That model doesn't fit, so they're just being really demanding about something
Yeah.
that doesn't work for them. So great, go do something else. I can't tell you
Yeah.
that because I'm selling these courses. I mean, I
Yeah.
can tell you to a certain degree. We don't have this, I'm not saying for my company, I'm saying for, the company I was working for.
Mhm.
We don't have this. You could try this thing that might not be
Yeah.
what you want,
Yeah. Yeah.
and trying to inform people in that way. So I just
Mhm.
think now it's almost like, there are people who are a lot more informed, but again, don't have necessarily all enough information to make really informed decisions, but enough information to know that if I do this, this is how I want it to be, and it's not going
Yeah.
to be that way. I don't know if that
Yeah.
makes sense. There's
It
sort of
does,
like
it
a
does.
mismatch.
Yeah, 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 because it's also about time, right? Because if we could have
Absolutely.
everything evolve at the same rate, pace, like everyone's kind of on the same page and everything's kind of working together, but no, you could be someone who is feeling, and I do think this is where I'm taking it more on the teaching side that is not necessarily tied to language. It's just like, the anyone who's
Uh-huh.
ever been a teacher of anything, the feeling of being so disempowered, disengaged, so detached from the profession itself, because you do feel like there's no point because like you're hitting a wall all the time, right? Because
Right.
systemic issues, because where you are, because I don't know, maybe in 10 years it'll be better, but right now it's not the time, right? And so I do agree that probably what you see is a very, I do think it might be different because of the
Yeah.
concentration, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
For sure, my perspective on this is built over many different types of, I would say, just firsthand, but also hearing from people around the world, the things that they're stuck in, the
Yeah.
things that they can't push back on, and the resounding cry being like, well, that's what it is. We can't do more. And we have to
Right.
kind of almost pretend every day when we go in that like we're doing something beneficial, when in fact, like, we hate it, So I do think many
Right.
people try to leave the teaching profession because they're so burned out, right? Because they're still like, it is exhausting trying to like push against something that is not that has that mismatch, and be it professional or learner, right? So
Right.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, God, I mean, my heart and my soul just sort of goes to, teachers in any capacity at the moment. I think again, like we've said, things go at different rates. And I think at the moment, the external pressure put on any kind of teacher,
yeah,
um, again, I mean, especially if you're teaching children, or the people you are serving, like your clients are the secondary people, right? And so in
Yeah.
this case, if you're teaching children, but their parents are the people who are paying for,
Yeah.
paying, or your clients are, it's a really, really, it's a really complicated situation
Yeah.
at the moment. And I think I mean, part of it is, of course, we don't have cultural hegemony anymore, and so everybody's
Mhm.
kind of got different values and different things,
Mm.
and all of this, and it becomes very, very, very hard. I'm very happy that I'm not in that position anymore, and definitely admire teachers who are able to be in that position, even if they are doing, feel that they can't make the difference they want to make
Mhm.
because of all of these different factors. Shit, I mean,
Mm.
it's
Yeah.
I like it's just got to be hard. It just breaks. I mean, it's like, how can it not
Yeah.
break you, especially if you do care?
Yeah.
Because I think that's one of the other issues, is that it's like, no, I do care,
Yeah.
um, but I care and I care. I'm just getting,
Yeah.
so much pushback from so many places that, of
Mm.
course, your response out of that is like, well, I'm just going to stop caring. I'm just going to show up.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's, unfortunately, and it's an understandable response. Unfortunately, it's not, it's the response that it is, but it's completely understandable, I think, for a lot of
Yeah.
people. I think there will be a change at some point, and I think it will become, I mean, I don't know what that looks like, but I think the idea of being in a classroom and this kind of, I don't think that's going to be the model of the future.
No, yeah, I think just a personal opinion on this. I feel that any type of education system is still kind of subject to Econ 101, meaning like
Of
supply and
course.
demand, right? So like we still have to kind of think about it in that sense, I think. And when we talk about learner empowerment agency, this kind of movement to make
Mhm.
sure that people who understand that it is not just a passive activity, that you have a lot
Yes.
of agency over where you go in your future and the decisions that you make,
Right.
this will start to shift in a way from kind of the opposite direction. I think a lot of the talk right now is on changing systems, reforming, like just
Mhm.
broken education systems, right? But if
Mhm.
everyone's crying broken education system and you're trying to go about it by talking to the ministry or department of whatever, right? There is a breakdown that is kind of outside of your control, yes, for sure. But how long will it take to resolve? Versus if we can start shifting in a, I mean, to me, it's a more direct way, right? Just going directly to the source, to the people who are
Who
attending
are
the
learning,
schools,
yeah.
to, yeah,
Mhm.
like go directly to the learners. This will start to shift the culture, the conversation. This will start to shift the demands also of the market. And you will have to adapt, right, in order
Right.
to meet the new needs of now. But I don't know. It's kind of an experiment, right? It's like a theory that I have. I'm like, I think I'm gonna hedge my bets on like going on the learner side, because there's a big part of me that's like, it would be great if I could find a way to like, maybe make a training for like professional development training, like how do we,
Yeah.
yeah, but then I would be stuck inside of that whole thing for like for how many years? Like I don't have the patience, I think, to be
Right.
there my whole life.
But I feel like that's the whole thing too. I mean, I think like what you're talking about is sort of reforming it almost in a, I mean, I hate to use this word, but almost in a grassroots way.
Yeah, I've literally used the same
Yeah.
word. Yeah.
Like, like that's the
Yeah.
word that comes to
I
mind. I don't
know.
want to use it
I
because of
know.
all the connotations,
I
but
know.
yeah, so using it in that way. And I think again, that's I definitely see people doing that on the ground. I do see in a certain way. And I mean, I do think that that's actually happening. Homeschooling is a really
Yeah.
good, I mean, it's something that I don't, again, has a lot of these other connotations, but you can see that as a direct reaction to this,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And you just take your kids out of this other
Yeah.
system, and you're doing this other thing, right? And I think that
Yeah.
that's a direct reaction to it. Of course, it has this other whole other thing, but that's, it's the
Yeah.
problem is the same. We're just,
Yeah. Yeah.
reacting to it in a different way, in a certain sense. And I think that, again, that personal agency, and definitely what you mean with, I can't choose where I'm going. I had a conversation with my niece, my Spanish niece, and she got her marks back from French class, actually. And
Mm.
her father's Moroccan, and so he's
Mm.
just pissed off. He's so
Oh,
angry that she got like a 5 out of 10 in French. Right? He's just so angry. It's not like he speaks French to her or anything. Like he's not like
yeah.
he's done nothing
Yeah.
to like facilitate this, but he's really really
Yeah.
angry about it. So we're having this conversation, and she's what, 12. And so we're having this conversation, and she's like, my French teacher is just, she's, she me tiene manía is what you say. Like she has it out for me.
Mm,
She hates me.
mm,
She's just really, you make one mistake with an accent
mm,
and blah, 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 and all this stuff,
yeah.
right? And, and her mom comes, she's like, oh yeah, we just have to wait until she gets like a new teacher next year. And my brain just like,
Mm,
so then I was like, okay, I'm gonna be the auntie like, I'm
yeah.
gonna be the auntie and just be able to like say what I want to say, right?
Mm,
And I was just like, okay, so you've got the situation, you've got this teacher, you've got this situation. How are you going to interact with that situation? How are you going to use your limited agency?
yeah.
Not tell your mom to go sin. How are you
Yeah.
going to solve this problem and
Yeah.
get the results that you want
Mhm.
from this class? Like, how are you going to react to that? Like, what
Mhm.
options do you have?
Mm.
And and her mom like looked at me and she's like, "Oh, that was a really good question." I'm
Mm.
like, "I know."
Yeah.
Like, like, why are you feeding into this narrative that she has?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? You're creating a victim. Like, she's
Yeah.
victimized
Yes.
herself.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? And and my sister-in-law is fantastic. Like, there's nothing, she's fantastic. There's nothing, she's, whatever, that's not an
Mm.
issue there. But it's that, okay, like, this is what options do we have? How can
Yeah.
we go about achieving these goals? And
Mm.
I think that is my little grassroots like thing there,
Mm. Mhm.
with, and this is with kids, it's easier to do when I'm talking to my clients who are, in their 40s,
Mm.
working at a company. It's like, oh, I can't do this. It's like, okay, well, let's look at our options. How can we solve this? It's a little bit of a
Yeah.
different situation, but that still is always a
Yeah.
question that you have. It's okay, this is
Mhm.
this is where I'm at. How can
Yeah.
I approach this situation? What options do I have available? What
Yeah.
opportunities do I
Yeah.
have? And so you're not a victim of your, oh, I didn't learn English when I was a kid, or
Yeah.
I was never good at this, or or my English teacher was not very good, and it's like
Yeah.
it's not, that's personal accountability, guys. Let's bring it back to what we can control.
Yeah.
um and we've all had terrible experiences learning languages. That's
Yeah.
part of, unfortunately, that's just kind of what it's been like. But you still learned French. I still learned French at some
Yeah.
degree. um and still overcame that, and so let's teach people how to do that.
Yeah. I think it's like not letting the narrative, the socially accepted narrative, I think, control the
The
parts of your
outcome.
life that haven't even happened yet, right? Like if you are just closing the door and it's not, people tend to think, okay, limiting beliefs, okay, so it's just like the power of the mind. No, it's not just the power of the mind. It's also
Exactly.
follow through. It's also like intentional
Right.
steps taken in alignment. But there's something there in what you're saying where it's like this kind of switch that needs to happen. And I do think I have the benefit of being able to, number one, choose who I work with, right? Number two,
Right.
people who tend to work with me are not the ones who are like, oh no, I'm a victim, right? Um, because we go through.
That's why they're in those positions as well.
Yeah, 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 exactly. They're like, yeah, like you had to have gotten to this level of growth, I think,
Mhm,
in order to understand what it's like to go to the next step. But
mhm.
for early stage, I mean, and where does it start? Children, right? Like literally, and you're right. And for sure, you learn a lot when you look at how a kid is approaching things, and you're just like, there are questions, there are observations, there are things I'm gonna like talk with your, not necessarily talk about to intervene and criticize, but to just bring into the
Yeah.
conversation as like a, hey, have you thought about this? Because, and you're right, like this sort of third party perspective that may not always exist, but when it does, it could be a benefit and could redirect the next X number of years of her life. Who knows, right?
Right. Right. And I think, and that's exactly like, that's the, that's kind of why I see my role in that case is sort of
Mm,
like, how are we going to approach the situation? How can we, and how have you thought, what solutions can,
yeah,
just, it's coaching is generally what
yeah,
it is,
yeah,
and that's fine. And I think that that's really helpful. And I do see that that might be the way sort of forward in everything in terms of
mm,
education is, with AI, with all of this stuff, it's like,
mm,
okay, well, let's teach people to be able to kind of, instead of like being controlled by that narrative,
yeah,
because we absolutely are. I mean, I'm
mm,
absolutely controlled by all my narratives, but I can kind of choose the narrative as well,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
choose and see what options are available and where. One of the things about good language learners, this is research based, based on studies about what are they're called. I'm not. It sounds like a bad word, but they are called good language learner
Yeah, it's
studies.
like
That's
the
what it's
term.
called. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an actual term. It's not. I
Yeah.
haven't just like said that.
Yeah.
And it's they're determined by different things, but one of the things that good language learners always do is they use their agency.
Mhm.
They often attribute, just like successful people, I'm sure you know this
Mhm.
from psychology,
Mhm.
successful people in most domains will sort of attribute their success often to luck, actually,
Mm.
but they've used their agency. So when you look at it, when you tease it all the way out, they'll say, "Oh, I was just really lucky that I was able to have this like teacher." But then they've used their agency in some way to really take advantage of that because they've had other
Mm.
students in that same class with that same teacher and that
Mm.
haven't, reached the same levels that they have, or they haven't had these sorts of experiences, right? And so
Mm.
it comes down to using agency um, for everything, for
Yeah.
everything. When I'm in a situation, obviously I don't have agency over what's going on in the world right now, but I can
Yeah.
sort of figure out
Yes.
how I'm going to manage for this little space that I'm standing on. That's kind of
Mm.
where my responsibility is, right? And
Yeah.
where I can bring my own personal accountability
Yeah.
and agency to that,
Yeah.
and how I show up and all of those things. And I think that's the same thing for learning anything,
Yeah.
and how can I, instead of talking to myself, that with the French kids, again, I had last week, I had this kid, and it was really, really challenging. It was about
Mm.
19 years old, mentally about 14, right? And
Mm.
that's kind of, just the kind of things that
Yeah.
happen. And he
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, je suis nul." I was like, "Why are you
Oh,
saying this? Why are
yeah.
you, he's like, "Well,
Yeah.
I didn't learn English like back in the day, so this is like really hard for me."
Oh
I
God.
know
Yeah.
that's really hard. I
Yeah.
know. So how are we going to figure out, we have class together for 5 hours.
Yeah.
Those hours are going to pass. You can't have your
Yeah.
phone. You're not allowed to have your mobile phone. Those
Yeah.
hours are going to pass regardless. How
Yeah.
are we going to approach this in a
Yeah.
way that you're taking advantage of this time?
Yeah.
And that was sort of what we did. I can't say like, oh, it was like a miracle. Absolutely not. There were days where he was kind of with me, he sat
Mm.
with me, and he like did his work, and he was able to like communicate in English probably for the first time in his life.
Yeah.
And there were other days that he just completely checked out and literally looked out the window for 5 hours. But
Mm.
at least we had that conversation. And I think that
Yeah.
that's sort of where that starts,
Yeah.
of changing that personal narrative,
Yeah.
and being able to take that then when he goes into a job and he has to learn how
Yeah.
to use Excel. I mean, I can't think of anything
Yeah.
else.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can use, yeah, yes,
Yeah.
what options do we have? Oh, we can look at YouTube, we can, ask
Yeah.
ChatGPT, we can do these different things.
Yeah.
But instead of being like, I have no idea how to do this, so I'm just gonna not do it.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
you know,
There's so
but
many
anyway,
things I want to react to just
hi.
from the French side of things, but also from the fact that parents and teachers who also reinforce this narrative.
Yeah.
It is the most destructive thing, I think. Like you literally cut off a kid's chances before they even start their life. And what good do you think you're doing by feeding this? Like I actually it pisses me off a lot when I hear it and I see it and I hear it represented in society a lot. And it's like, oh well, because oh, if your father didn't make you go to blah 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 and you
Yes.
spent all that time in basketball instead of English, you would have blah blah blah. And it's like, excuse me,
Right.
like
Right.
what good are you giving this
Yeah.
kid? Because that kid's
Right.
just like taking all this in, right? Yeah, pisses me off a lot.
Yeah, this is just victimizing, like victimizing
Yeah.
ourselves. I mean, I want to make very clear, I'm completely guilty of this as well. Like,
Yeah.
definitely guilty when
Yeah.
when you come up against some sort of like, some sort of like uncomfortable truth about yourself that you're not able to do something. It's
Mm.
so much easier to say, oh, well, I didn't do this in the
Mm.
past, or, oh, my whatever situation was my whatever situation.
Yeah.
And it's very
Yeah.
easy to like forgive yourself for not doing something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally guilty of this, but
Mm.
also sort of aware when I'm doing it. It's like, oh, you're just keeping yourself stuck in that. Like
Yeah.
you're screwing yourself over here.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
if you want to, if that feels more comfortable than actually taking some action towards improving, then great, then just do that. But you've made that choice.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
I think,
exactly. And it's a choice. And you don't realize it's a choice when
yeah,
no one's, even if it's your default, it's still your default choice.
right.
right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's your choice. It's your choice. You're making that choice about the stories that you're
Yeah.
allowing to limit. That is
Yeah.
the limiting belief of the
Yeah.
limiting belief. Yeah.
Yeah,
It
exactly.
does
The
sound really
limiting part.
woo-woo. It does sound
I
really woo-woo, and
know.
it kind of is. It's kind of like
Yeah.
take it, but it's not like magic. It's
It's
not.
not invalid either because of course our thoughts shape our reality and of
Yeah.
course like whatever we it doesn't mean that they write our reality. It just means that like how we choose to see things are what we tell ourselves and then what we believe and then therefore that's how we respond and react. It's like that's like basic psychology. I don't know how to explain,
Right,
right?
right. And
But
I think, yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It is. It's basic psychology and it is. It's just that it's just true. Like it's
Yeah,
just,
I know. I
yeah.
know.
And I think that that's something that again needs to is missing from the broader conversation about, especially on social media about like language learning, like you're saying, like the
Yeah.
polyglots that like learned this and we're going to do this. And it's like, well, that was your experience and it's
Yeah.
fantastic. And you're conflating your personal experience with this
Yes.
sort of absolute truth.
Yes. Yes.
And that being those two things. And it's like, yes, you had all of these experiences. This was your story that you've told yourself. This is how this has happened. You've reacted in this way, where that's not going to be the way that I necessarily that works for me. And that's
Right.
okay. And that's
Right.
okay.
Yeah.
Let's just have that. It's
Yeah.
different. I wonder, can you think of a good idiom that means the same thing? There's more than one way to skin a cat that does not mean.
Oh, I know. I know. I hate using that one because it's like, oh, poor cats, poor cats. Like, I
Yeah, no, I
know.
know. I'm like, I want to get away from it, but I don't know
I
how to like
know.
say that in that same way.
Let me
But yeah,
think.
there's more than one way of doing something.
It's more, I think people have said like there's more than one road to get to your destination or something like that. It's not really an idiom. It's more
Right.
like what people say,
It's not
like,
as much of the sort of like
yeah,
active way of doing something. But
yeah,
yeah, it is.
yeah.
There's more
We'll
than
we'll
one way
figure
of
it
doing
out.
something.
We'll write a new one. I don't know.
Well, you'll
Um,
make our own idioms.
I know, I know. I'm wondering before we wrap up, if you
Mhm.
can kind of give us a preview as to what Love to Lingo will have in this coming year, what you're
Okay.
kind of loosely planning.
Yeah. So I've just finished a really, really interesting, well, I think it's really interesting. It was my like dream. I've been in the works for years,
Mm.
series of posts on Substack that is aimed at intermediate level language learners. And the idea is that there are, I think, 25 posts
Oh,
that you would
wow.
just kind of go through. They're short, kind of you go through
Yeah.
kind of one a day and sort of learn the basics of language learning. So I talk a
Mhm.
lot about things like comprehensible input and
Mm,
things like I don't know, like the noticing hypothesis. There's some
mm,
basic theory
mm,
about language acquisition and language learning there, so
mm,
that with the aim of people being able to sort of make those decisions based on a scientific background instead of
mm,
what someone says worked for them, right?
mm,
So this is kind of
mhm,
what science sort of says, or
mhm.
evidence has told us works and
Yeah.
doesn't work and how it works. And also kind of little techniques about how people can build up their own self practice, kind of the outside. So not going to language classes or,
Mm,
Duolingo or anything, but how
mhm.
you can really take advantage of all of that evidence-based research and apply that in ways to work on your language learning. So that happened in January. All of those posts are free. There's no paywall or anything,
Mhm.
and I really invite people to take a look there. I do want to do something similar with for beginning level learners. I'm
Mhm.
hoping to start doing Italian actually.
Oh,
And sort of doing this as sort of like, okay, well, how would I apply this and what is working
yeah.
for me in this way as a beginning
Yes.
Italian learner. Um, and again, if in the future, possibly do something similar for more advanced learners because the
Mhm.
way you approach learning a language is going to be different in those
Yeah.
different like through those different phases. And of
Right.
course, I'm looking mainly at kind of European languages. I think obviously if I were to learn a language with a different script, it'd be
Mhm.
completely different as well. So
Mhm.
it's very much sort of in that space.
Mm.
And the thing that I'm the most excited about that I am hoping to get off the ground by the end, at least the pilot off the ground by the end of the month, is called the Love to Lingo Connection. And the idea is to create a space where we can have language exchange classes, but
Mhm.
in a structured way online. So the idea would be that be facilitated. So we'd have, let's
Mhm.
say, four English speakers learning Spanish, four Spanish speakers learning English,
Mm.
and they would have, I would be facilitating sort of activities that they're doing with each other, So you're not in an exchange where you kind of like, well, what are we going to talk about? And
Yeah.
how do we do that? And it's kind of
Yeah.
awkward.
Yeah.
And you get a chance to talk with different people around the world. And that's sort of
Mm-hmm.
the idea at the moment, is to start with English and Spanish because those are the
Mm-hmm.
language I feel the most comfortable with,
Mm-hmm.
and then possibly move into other languages facilitated by other, expert teachers and coaches and things that can bring some sort of, you know, enjoyment and structure to that kind of
Yeah.
experience. So
Yeah.
hopefully getting people to connect, but not in a language class, not sort of like these are the corrections and we're
Yeah.
learning past simple or something, but
Yeah.
in a different way. So
Yeah.
that's what I'm really, really excited about, to work on. So hopefully the first thing will happen in the end of February, but hopefully by the time this releases,
Yeah.
um,
It'll
we'll
be.
we'll have had some experience.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yes, I'm looking at the schedule. Probably, probably by the time this episode airs, this will probably be up and running, and you'll probably have some other things
It'll
that.
be great.
Yeah,
Everybody will
yeah,
enjoy it. It'll be fantastic.
yeah,
Maybe not. But
yeah.
yeah, there'll be a learning curve there. But yeah, I'm
Mm,
really excited about that. And it's again something that I, sort of in a selfish way, like want to kind of get off the ground so that then I can have a wonderful kind of French English speaker do what, so
mm,
I can participate as a
yeah,
participant, for
yeah,
French, and kind of
yeah,
have that sort of safe space there where we, can practice
yeah,
and feel, connecting with people, but isn't
mm,
really a class. Like I'm not
yeah.
personally that interested in having like a really structured class. But that again, that's me as a learner. That's what I'm interested in. So
Yeah. And I think actually what you're describing, it's something that's really effective for a lot of people because they are looking for something in between formal classes
yeah,
and just like exactly like get on a call. What do we talk about? No idea. Hey,
right,
how was your day? I don't know what to do. Do you want to read something? Sounds good. What did you eat for lunch? Right. So it's something that's
right,
in between. And I also think that the biggest barrier that we're encountering as like humans right now, obviously, is the fact that if you want to really understand what it's like to live in another language, I mean, not everyone has the means to just go and like
yeah,
put themselves in another country, right? Even for a short period of time. And so this virtually would allow people
yeah.
access in a way that could be fantastic, right? That could like open up so many
Yeah.
doors for so many people around the world.
Right. And especially like, and again, especially if we're talking about global languages, it's also allows you like this
Yeah.
access to,
Yeah.
not necessarily native speakers, but expert level speakers from different places. So I mean, for me, it's just, fascinating to, a lot of people. I talked to a lot of people from Argentina, it's like, oh,
Hmm.
right. You
Yeah.
know, it's a totally different Spanish, from the Spanish
Yeah.
that I speak. And that's quite interesting as well, as a learner,
Yeah.
to have access to people from different places. And of course, with the broader mission of kind of like, let's
Yeah.
get back to that, fantasy of like global community.
I
Let's
know.
figure out,
Yeah.
it might just be a fantasy, but if in my small little
Yes.
context that I can, my small little, square foot that I stand on, if I
Mm.
can kind of get that to work, then that's great. That's what I can control. That's my agency. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm trying to bring to the world. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah. Well, we will look forward to seeing it because
Yeah,
that's
hopefully.
that's that's the coolest part about this being in, real time is like we don't know what's happening
Yeah, we'll
yet.
see
So
what
we get to
happens. Well, we'll
see.
see if the
Yeah.
world's still here by then.
Oh my
But
God. Yeah. Just
we'll talk about that. That's a whole
that's a
nother.
whole other thing.
Well,
Yeah.
but I feel like, I feel like there needs to be some sort of, in this podcast, it's like this was recorded on the blah 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 day,
Yeah.
like because that's
Yeah.
the reality right now that
Yeah.
things are
It's true.
so, it's
Yeah.
not, I mean, it is
Oh,
evergreen in a certain sense, but evergreen assuming that the world is
yes.
going to remain somewhat, familiar
Yeah.
by May, I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. So this is February 7th, 2025 that we're recording. If the world implodes before this episode airs
Right.
or if it changes drastically. Yeah, I do think that that's some of the episodes I will mention when I've recorded, just
Right.
because it's like we're talking about winter and I'm like, oh, by the time your
Yeah,
episode,
perfectly. Right,
records,
right.
like it's gonna be, yeah, like we're talking
Yeah.
about the holidays. But anyways, we will look forward. Thank you so much for
Yeah,
joining me
thank
today. Thank
you.
you
It's been
for
such a
spending.
pleasure, Michelle. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for everything that you are doing and
Oh.
bringing voices, um, to this space. So thank you.